Now, in today's video, I am going to talk about some things that I feel like the climate change narrative or agenda can actually learn from African culture. Now, why is that? Well, because I feel like when we're talking about climate change, we forget that there are indigenous populations around the world that are the reason why we haven't hit the point of return like 100 years ago. We also seem to forget that a lot of these societies are living in the way that we need in order for the environment to remain beautiful. And we're forgetting the fact that historically we have been demonizing these very same populations for this behavior and labeling it as fetish, underdeveloped, uncivilized. Because personally, what worries me is that a lot of the climate change conversation that I have been seeing doesn't take into consideration the diversity around the world. So for example, when we're talking about food, we're talking that under the assumption that everybody has priority around the world for particular grains, and we are not considering the impact it has on indigenous people. And also in terms of the various environments that indigenous people live in, it might not be conducive to certain lifestyles. The second thing is that when I find that we're on the receiving end as if we are not already living in the way that is conducive to the environment, or not acknowledging things that we are already doing as part of our culture and our spiritual systems that is in support of the environment, of which I'm going to be talking about today. But three, the change agenda, I think because we're not super included in that conversation, a lot of these new developments actually cost a lot of African lives. So for example, these electric cars, where are the ingredients coming from? How are they mined? What's happening to the environments where they are mined? And also, what's happening to those very people? How much lives does it cost? It's all well and good telling everybody to get these particular vehicles, but does that mean there's going to be any people left in Congo? So I feel like if we start including them more in the conversation, we're going to come out with something that's more well-rounded in terms of saving the environment. The second element of it, as I've mentioned before, that historically we have been demonized for our traditions. And so there are some of us who are still slightly ashamed of certain things that we usually do. We listen to those colonial narratives about the way we used to do things, not realizing that a lot of these things that we still do to this day are going to provide the answer in terms of the future of this earth. And I think that's pretty huge. So hopefully if I've done my job today, I will help change the climate change conversation for the better, but also inspire African and indigenous people to continue living the culture and the tradition, because in doing so, you are going to help save the environment. Okay, so the first one I want to talk about is how we build our houses. And I want to draw particular attention to the mud houses. Now, the reason why I want to talk about this is because I noticed personally when I was at my mum's, who's built her house in Ghana, like in the Western way, without the air conditioners, that place is hot. But in my family house, and also when I go to mud houses, there isn't that temperature dysregulation. So there is something there to learn. Also, it's important to realize that the construction industry actually contributes to 38% of the CO2 emissions. It is a madness. Now, before I go into a bit more of the detail about the amazing, wonderful benefits and innovations of mud house, I want to dispel some myths. First of all, it's that mud houses don't last long. In Mali, the Great Mosque of Mali, the current structure was built in 1907, which means it's over 100 years old. Now, like with any building structure, including the modern structures, and anyone who owns a house knows how much we're spending in maintaining that house, there is regular maintenance needed, but that is 100 years old. However, the city in Yemen, also, which goes on to my next point, which is that mud houses don't look very pretty, is a perfect example of a city that is like hundreds of years old. And if you look at the design, you will look at it and not think traditional mud house. So you can see from the design how you can use it and innovate it in a number of ways. But what are the benefits in terms of the environment? So the first one is that mud houses are very good at temperature regulation. If it's boiling hot outside, it will be cool inside. If it's freezing outside, it will be warmer on the inside. So the mud's thermal mass stabilizes indoor temperatures, reducing energy needs. It's also breathable and so improves air quality. So on top of the fact that it regulates it, it actually improves the air quality within the house. It also allows for innovation and changes for when the family grows, then you can add extra bits much easily. And then if it shrinks and you want to reduce it, you can actually just stop maintaining that section and then it will disintegrate and go into the earth where it came from. Also, because it's like a real earth product, if it's like 100% earth-based product, it's almost carbon neutral. A lot of the damage of the construction industry is the processing and everything that goes into it. Concrete is not exactly the best. So we don't have that situation with the earth-based product. It doesn't have the same level of processing. So we're also saving a lot on that. And as you can see, you can build some amazing designs and amazing, beautiful elements of it. I also refer to building of houses in terms of my family house and then in terms of the shape that we build the house. And I think that's important because that shape not only allows for great communal get-together, which helps the environment in terms of mental health and community gatherings and so much so, but also airflow. It allows for a lot of airflow. So also not just considering the material, but the shape that we build our house can also be helpful for the environment, and therefore we can learn a lot by the way that Africans build their houses. The air conditioning, let's look at this. So when you have a house that is not very good at regulating temperature because of the materials that you use, just know that in terms of its high energy consumption, also the greenhouse gas, most models use fluorinated gas, which are 28,000 times worse than CO2 as greenhouse gas emissions. And then also we have an urban heat island effect. Air conditioners are also exacerbate the urban heat island effect, raising outdoor temperatures by 2% in dense areas. I'm going to link below some of the examples of these kind of, where all this information is coming from, so you could do your own research. So not only like when if you're using toxic materials, one, in the process of producing those materials, there's drama. Two, it doesn't regulate temperature, so now you have to invest in another piece of equipment that is again causing its own drama. So there's something to learn about the way we build our houses. The other thing I want to talk about is reusing containers and so on. I remember when I was tasked by my workplace many years ago to do a paper on why BME communities were not engaging in the green agenda. And I remember going to visit this Caribbean elder. And, I always love how elders speak, but essentially at the end of the conversation, she made me realize, like, what is this? But also they're calling it green, but we're calling it part of our culture. And then she highlighted some of the things that we do in our house that is part of what we do that they may classify as green, but it's just about the way we live. And when I went to do the research and speak to other communities, I realized that they don't see it as something separate. It's part of who they are. And I'm going to give you an example from my own mum because she's a G. First of all, this thing here that we use to save our bags, which we have been doing for God knows how long, is over 10 years old. This just gives you a slight indication of how long we've been doing this before green was even a name. Actually, it's probably more than 10 years. Or was it 20 years old? The other thing is, if you look at this container here. Now, if you look at this container, you'll realize that you don't remember the last time we had baby wipes that look quite like that. Yep, because these baby wipes is at least 30 years old. And guess what we store in it? We store our sewing things in there. So we all know about the biscuit tin that's used to store our sewing materials. But obviously, as you can see, we have been doing this for God knows how long, before it was something fashionable, before it became something that, everybody was doing. So we as Africans really understood what we meant by reusing. She was doing this because that's how she grew up, and it's from the culture. Like, if it's not broken, just because it started as a baby wipe doesn't mean it can't be used for something else later and we're going to throw it away. I grew up with, we do not waste, we reuse, we are creative with how we use our materials and our containers and so on, and it's all over our culture. So there's a lot that we can learn, that instead of it being like a separate agenda, it's just the way we live. I think we live in a very consumerist, because capitalist society is about consumption. There's this thing where it's almost like I'm going to force you to use in as many different ways as possible, and then you chuck out and then we bring you more, you chuck out and we bring you more, but it goes beyond that. Then we have fast fashion. Now, in front of me, I've got some kente, and I've also got a piece of material here that has a old school design, and there's a reason why I'm showing this to you. First of all, let's take a look at the kente. In African tradition, we value the clothes that we wear. We value our cloth. Now, fast fashion contributes a lot to emissions. In fact, the overproduction, if we look at Ghana and we look at all the second-hand clothes that are just lining the bin sites, and just basically we see what it's doing to Ghana. This just gives you an idea of the impact of fast fashion. But there's a lot that we can learn from African culture here. First of all, this kente in Ghanaian culture is considered one of the valuable materials. Like lots of other cultures have various materials that are really valuable. And when we buy our cloth, we're not just thinking about cloth that works for us during our lifetime. We actually inherit cloth too. So if somebody's ill, there's a special occasion, you might find some of the elders actually gifting the person one of their traditional cloths, which is why I showed you one of the designs. So if you've ever inherited cloth before, you might have found that one of the designs that I've shown you is one of the designs that you inherited, because it's a well-known design in Ghana. So we take it to the next level. We're not just looking at cloth that works for our lifetime. We're also looking for cloth that we could also inherit and give to our children. The other thing as well is the design of our cloth. So a lot of our cloth is wrapper-based, our head wraps wrapper-based. And what that allows is for you to do different styles without you having to buy a new piece of cloth. So there's a lot to be learned in terms of the African approach to fashion. We're not just talking about clothes for a lifetime. We're talking about clothes for a generation. We don't do fast fashion. Now, we wanted to talk about toxic dyes. Now, I intentionally put mud cloth on. So this is an example of African mud cloth. And also the kente I showed you, there's agotime kente, which is known for its slightly duller colors. And that's because the duller colors that we use are plant-based, and there's only a certain kind of color you can get using plants. And again, with mud cloth, again, it's natural dyes and via natural processes. And I want to highlight the fact that the toxic chemicals significantly impact. So harmful dyeing fabric consumes an estimated 5 trillion litres of water annually, World Resource Institute, contributing significantly to the environmental footprint of clothing. Harmful chemicals in synthetic dyes also pollute ecosystems. Traditional natural dyes from leaves, flowers, wood, or natural fibres like this may lower this impact. So our approach to dyeing and our approach to our various designs is just an example of what you can achieve. And I did a class, I will show you what I designed. It looks a bit, but yeah, and this is what we achieved using plant dyes for dyeing our fabrics and the different bright colors. And oddly enough, one of the dyes we used was the sorghum leaf that we used for wache. So we have around us many ways to dye clothes, and some of these skills that were thought to be useless are now important in terms of our approach to fashion and life and so on. Now, I hope that at this point, you've kind of seen the African approach to various things. But what I think is a running theme is that we work with nature. We, look at what we have in our environment and use that to define for the various things that we make. Now, what do I mean? I'm going to give you a few quick examples. This is Broom 2.0. It's now 2.0. A lot of us would have seen this broom before because it's in our house, because it is actually useful. If we've got a small area to sweep or clean, we use this. It's also very good on different surfaces. So if we're sweeping from carpet to floor, floor to carpet, we can use this broom. It would be perfect for this. This particular broom is what we use outside. So if you want to sweep the concrete or you want to sweep grass, you can do it. But it's also very innovative, and I'll show you what I mean. If you want to sweep small area, if you want to sweep big area, if you want to sweep high up or down below, you can actually put a larger stick and you tie it. If you see here, this has been tied with a piece of material, so we really don't waste nothing. Or you can get a piece of twine. Once it's finished, broken up to pieces, you can't do anything with it. It could be compostable. Everything easy. So all the plastic that you'll be using for those plastic brooms and sweepers or whatever that you're using, this works perfectly fine on loads of different surfaces. And we use this outside and it's still here. This is years old, years. Now, this is chakocha. Now, there's a video I've done in terms of the benefits of chakocha. This is what we use to clean our teeth. It's basically a chewing sponge. Now, I bring this up because in the US alone, over 1 billion toothbrushes are thrown every single year, and most of them are plastic. And it takes, 500 years to biodegrade? Plastic. Well, the other option is you can use chakocha. Again, most of us are very aware of this because we're still using this to clean our teeth. There is a science behind its benefit. If we look at our grandmothers with all their teeth, it explains exactly why this is beneficial. But not only does it not contain any plastic, it's natural from the earth. So you use that and you're putting it in your mouth. So what else to put in your mouth but something natural and beautiful? 2, Once you use it, you dispose of it, you could put it in the compost bin so it goes right back to the earth. It feeds the earth. It's going to make some beauty because I compost mine, so I'll use it for, my soil. But on top of that, if, for example, depending on what's going on in my mouth, like, if I've got a little mini infection, I might add a little bit of myrrh tincture to the chakochat and chew it. My grandma also advised add a little bit of salt to it and chew it. So there's different ways you can use it. We also have chewing stick if you prefer to use that instead. But this is something that we use, and we're working with the earth for everything in our lives, including not even just sweeping our house, cleaning our teeth, but there's another one. Now, I'm also going to show you this, and I'm going to read something to you from Stevenage Council and Friends of the Earth. Did you know that many disposable period products contain up to 90% plastic, especially pads? The average pack of pads contains 4 to 5 bags worth. So this obviously includes the wrapping, yeah? But when you've gone through your period for a few days, you literally got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Just imagine this in your vajayjay. Why would you do that? Does that even make any sense? And then in terms of blood catching products, how many of them do you know have added fragrance? On top of that, it says, let me read from here. Synthetic fragrances can be made up of a cocktail of 3,900 chemicals, according to the Chem Fatale report. These contain chemicals which are carcinogens, allergens, irritants, and endocrine disrupting chemicals. I would love to have sat in that meeting to see how that managed to get through the board meeting and then turned into, millions invested and turned into a product. Because I feel like this much plastic and then putting off the fragrance element of it is like a new phenomenon. Like when I go down supermarket aisle and I can smell the period aisle, it's relatively new in the history of, I just don't understand what conversation is happening. So there's a lot we can learn in terms of African culture, because this is called the bouée. And this is not actually what we would use, but this represents what we would have traditionally used as period pads. And so we'll tie it underneath, and then once you do it, you rewash it, and it's made of cotton. So the thing to note here is that one, it's cotton, biodegradable, and we're reusing it. And then in other cultures like the Maori, they would use moss as well as a cloth as well. So this is just another example of the things that we can learn from in terms of reusable pads. When we're talking about reusable pads, like I think sometimes people talk to Africans like we don't know what a reusable pad is, whereas historically that was the only option. Like this is what we decided to go for. On top of that, I think and this is kind of also what the purpose of the video is, because our culture has been demonized so much. Sometimes when I hear about period poverty back home, it makes me wonder that what do you mean by period poverty? Does it mean that you can't buy those branded pads because cotton cloths are found, it's there, but we've been so demonized into believing that our culture is so rubbish that we can have the resources to change things, but we won't, because the West has said if it's not us that created it, it's useless. So I think there is a lot to be said. So this is an example of a traditional way. So when we have our ceremony, we have this to kind of represent what we would have traditionally used as a period cloth. But yeah, I also forgot to add, a recent study from the US found that non-organic rayon-based tampons contain some pretty nasty chemicals, paint stripper, to name just one. Like sometimes I really get shocked about some of the conversations that must have been happening for someone to think it was okay to put that in a period pad. Like, and look, you're putting down it. Yeah. Now, the other thing that we can learn from is about our skincare. So this is shea butter that we use for our skin. And most of the time it's just like we melt it and then we use it straight. Like a lot of with 1-2 ingredients, we've not got these toxic chemical concoctions. And again, it's from a tree, it's a shea nut. And then this is some black soap. And that lye element of it comes from like a plantain or cocoa potash and so on. So this is just an example of some natural products that we use for our skin. And also you can use black soap to wash dishes. You could use, or even as a shampoo, you could use it for so many different things. We don't need these billion different containers, these billion different products to do the same job. Again, I think that's part of that capitalist consumerist. So I have to make slight changes to each product so that you can buy 3 bottles instead of just the one thing that will be able to do all of it. So this is what I use on my skin. This is what I've used to wash dishes. I use it on my body. I use it on my hair. This is black soap, you see? And a lot of us have it in our house because we're very familiar with this stuff. So I hope that this video has taught, like I mentioned, things twofold. It's taught the climate change community that Africa has a lot within their culture. Their culture is based on working with the environment. We had respect for the environment, so much respect that when we had respect for something like a tree, you were all like, oh my gosh, they're worshipping a tree. Like, oh, why are you so bush and so uncivilized? They're worshipping seas and stuff. Now we're realizing that trees are important for air, for breathing. If we had no trees on the earth, we wouldn't be here. Do you know what I mean? So it's not that we were worshipping the tree, but we respected our environment. And so it's important to acknowledge that colonial impact on our approach to culture and our tradition, but also use that as a source of inspiration in terms of future development and how we care for the environment. And also for those of us who are from these cultures that may have traditionally been demonized, be proud, because we're moving into the future. And as we're moving into the future, we're starting to realize that a lot of what our ancestors were doing in the past are exactly what we need now. And that diverting away from that way is partially what's leading us to, where we are going. And also to consider the fact that the many of us who are maintaining those paths of our ancestors are the reason why we haven't gone so far down the line that we're basically finished. The indigenous people who are keeping the culture, using the brooms, using the chakocha, not going into the fast fashion, doing second, third, fourth and fifth hand. Here we always took second hand. In Ghana we're talking fifth, sixth, seventh hand. So that's what's keeping us going. When I did some research on the top 10 countries responsible for the CO2 emissions, and it's very interesting to look at. We are always on the receiving end, especially as Africa's receiving end for the minerals and literally destruction of our land for these new green products. And I know there's new technological developments that are being carried out that have high CO2. So yeah, I could go on ages about it. If you enjoyed, please subscribe. If you are interested in other health-based narratives, again, subscribe. But don't forget to share, comment. Let's have a discussion. Let's have a dialogue. Talk to me about things that you do in your culture that is in harmony with the environment and nature and what you've always been told and always understood that sometimes people think we don't understand. Anyway, let me not rant. I love you. Take care. Bye.